everybody, and welcome to Horse Illustrated's webinar series. My name is Mary Cage. I am the digital manager here at Horse Illustrated, so I'll be your host today. And of course, our guest this month is Shelley Paulson. Shelley, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So before we go ahead and get started, I just want to do a quick rundown for everybody. First, I do recommend setting your view to speaker mode. There should be a view icon on your screen, and that will allow you to see me and Shelley rather than all the icons all over the screen. Other than that, just a quick overview of the format. I'm going to ask Shelley some questions on behalf of Horse Illustrated for the first portion of the webinar, and then we'll move into the audience Q&A portion. So on your screen, you should see a Q&A button. That's where you will type in your own questions for Shelley. You can wait until we get to that portion, or if you think of something at any point during the webinar, feel free to submit them at that point. But that's pretty much everything. So we'll go ahead and get started. I do want to introduce Shelley real quick. Shelley Paulson is a professional equine photographer, and prior to becoming a full-time photographer, she still had a creative career in graphic and web design before becoming a photographer and eventually full-time equine photographer. While she did some portrait work, she now primarily focuses on commercial and editorial photography, and she also spends a lot of her time educating and mentoring other photographers. So she's definitely the right photographer to be learning from, and I think we'll all get a lot out of this today. So Shelley, I always like to start these by asking our guest how you very first fell in love with horses.
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, okay, it was the gateway drug, the Breyer horse models, that when I think maybe first grade, I had a babysitter that gave my sister and I each Breyer model horse. And then every birthday and Christmas after that, it was, paging through the Breyer catalog and picking out which ones I wanted. I was probably one of the easiest children to buy gifts for basically most of my childhood, because it's like, well, which Breyer do we give her? And then when I was about 10 years old, my parents signed me up for riding lessons through community ed in our community area, like our school district, basically. And then I started riding lessons. I was terrible at it. I had to take the very first beginner thing twice because I was so bad at it. And but I didn't give up. I loved horses too much. I loved being around them. And I kept taking lessons and leasing horses. And then when I was 26 and had my first full-time job and just a little bit of money, I bought my first horse.
Love that. Yeah, Breyer models definitely can be that gateway drug, and I think that's been the case for a lot of us.
It is.
Yeah, and then as for photography, when did the love for the camera kind of develop for you?
Well, I kind of fell into it sideways in that I was doing the web design, like when the internet was kind of new. I'm not young. And it was really kind of a thing where my clients just needed pictures. And so some of the first things I took photos of were like corporate things and buildings and, headshots and whatever to go with my corporate client, like building websites for them. And I had a film camera. Actually, I was working for a very, what's called a civil contractor. So they build roads and bridges. They built 494 originally. And they had a calendar that they would put out every year with pictures of their projects, like a bridge, a road. And they had me buy a film camera for that because this was before digital was really accessible. And I was pretty terrible at that too, but you can't get roads and bridges too wrong because there's lots of light. But then I had this camera and I was like, oh, I have a horse. Let me point it at the horse. And the photos were bad. And then when I was laid off from that job after 9/11, construction really tanked. And they let me kind of keep everything, including like Photoshop and all my computers and everything. And that's when I went into doing web design on my own. And that's when I got the very first digital Rebel. Like you couldn't go over like 400 or 800 ISO without it completely being grainy. But instantly I was like, okay, I can figure out how shutter speed works with ISO, with aperture, and I can fix all my problems with some really bad, heavy Photoshop work. And, and that I was off to the races. So it was really the dawn of the digital SLR era that got me into photography. But before that, I was really just, I loved graphic design. I loved designing logos and websites and brochures and all of that. But when I went digital and I could really kind of figure out what to do and do all sorts of things with those images on my computers, things I now regret, then that's when I started to fall in love with photography.
Absolutely, makes sense. And you kind of had that creative background already doing design and stuff. And have you ever noticed that that creative background has contributed to your eye for photography or anything like that?
Yeah, 100%. Because, well, not only is it a creative skill, but I have a lot of technical skill.
Mhm.
And, when I was doing websites, it wasn't just the interface design. I was coding backends. I was connecting websites to databases when that was like a new thing and doing a lot of that by hand. And so I have this like kind of really good mastery over both sides of my brain where I can understand the technical and I can also bring the creative into it. But there's also a lot of things in design, and I never went to school for design. I just have my brain just works really well with creative things and
Yeah.
design. But there's such thing as finding like the right composition and balance and colors and white space. And I do believe a lot of those like aesthetics and a lot of that experience then shifted into my photography, because for me, like probably my hidden weapon in photography is really, really strong composition skills, but you don't necessarily notice it because I don't call attention to it and make it like really obvious. But the subtleties of composition can take an image from average to above average really fast.
Mhm. Absolutely, that totally makes sense. And when did you go ahead and decide to take the plunge to become a full-time photographer, and then kind of tell us the story of how that turned into full-time equine photography?
Yeah, well, I need to go back and find out. I think it was like around maybe 2012 or so, where I was actually doing mostly weddings at that time, because it was before social media. It was really hard to get the word out about being a equine photographer, horse photographer, unless you wanted to stand in a show arena all day. And I had no interest in that. That to me is like working in a factory. It's just like it's the same shot over and
Yeah.
over. And it's a good business model. It's a great way for equine photographers to make money, but it didn't resonate with me. But I'm so glad that I shot weddings first, because again, I learned the technical, I learned how to light things, I learned how to survive 8-hour days with difficult people, which now comes in really handy with commercial work. And and being able to, like, you had to make it work. Sun, rain, difficult people, dark
Yeah.
churches, dark receptions, like these people are paying, a lot of money, and I had to produce great images, and I had to produce them for 8 hours straight, usually, or longer. And so it was a kind of boot camp that I think a lot of people don't get these days if they don't start with weddings.
Mhm.
So I'm super grateful for those years. And as I was getting well known as a wedding photographer, I started traveling a lot. Like I went to Colombia, I went to Mexico, and then I was all over the US. And it was getting harder to service those web design clients. And so I finally let them go one at a time. And then I was full-time photography, and I had a handful of equine clients. But when social media hit, that's when I was really able to ramp up the web design. And then a little wrinkle in my life happened. And if people have heard me tell my story before, they've heard this. But in 2013, I fell on a concrete floor. It has nothing to do with horses, but I just slipped on water and I landed headfirst on a concrete floor. And I sustained a traumatic brain injury. And at that point, I still had a full summer of weddings. That was May, and I had a full summer of weddings booked.
Yeah.
And I had just terrible headaches and, all the, confusion and trying to find the right words, and just a really difficult summer. And I got to the next year and I was still struggling, and I finally decided this is enough. I can't keep doing these weddings, because the weddings would actually bring on the symptoms because of the amount of stress that weddings bring.
Sure.
And I was doing quite a bit of equine work. I mean, I was licensing images to Horse Illustrated at that time. I had a few companies that were hiring me to do photography, but it's honestly, it's really hard for equine photographers to make a full-time living with portraits, especially in a place like Minnesota where, we have May until October.
Yeah.
And like late May until October for portrait sessions. And so what do you do the rest of the year to make money? But I had to quit the weddings. And so I just kind of went cold turkey on those and went all in on horses. And in the in between, I had also been toying with the education side of things, and eventually I ramped that up too. But at first, it was really just doing the portraits. I had a few commercial clients, and licensing stock images, which is basically the editorial.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that first year was really hard, and I didn't make much money. And that was the year we needed to qualify for the farm that we now live on, and so it was pretty stressful times. But when I put all my energy into one thing that I was passionate about and really loved, uh, it grew. It grew
Mm.
fast. And now, I mean, it was hard to let go of the weddings because it was significant income, but now I'm surpassed that. And so it's a little bit of a tale of you might have to jump off the edge of the cliff, but there will be something to catch you at the end of that.
Absolutely. And it's so
Hmm.
nice to drive your focus into something you're already so passionate about with horses. You kind of touched on, the things that are difficult and the things that you kind of were able to latch on to get yourself started in equine photography. Do you have any advice for those who are maybe trying to break into it themselves full time?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of people jump in a little too fast before proving that proving their proof of concept, basically. Like, do you have a day job and you're doing photography part-time and you just cannot keep up with both of them? Or do you just hate your day job and you want to quit and do equine photography full-time? I think the second is a little bit of a recipe for disaster because you need to know that you can replace your income. And photographers are notorious for underpricing and undervaluing really themselves. There's so much imposter syndrome. There's so much of a lack of understanding of how to run a profitable photography business. And so people are, if you're doing sessions for $500 a session, if you figure out your cost of doing business, and what you need to make, and then you figure that out, divide it by the amount of sessions you think you can do. Okay, can you do 50 sessions this year? That might be the number you have to do. And so I think a lot of photographers go into it without really understanding the math and really understanding the expenses because, I mean, just the subscriptions alone of all the different things. Now you can't just buy a piece of software anymore. Now you got to pay $20 a month for
Mhm.
it. And so I think that probably my biggest advice is to really know the numbers and really have your pricing where it needs to be in order to let go of your day job. I think it's actually more rare than people realize for equine photographers to make a full-time living,
Yeah.
especially if they don't have another, like a partner or spouse to depend on for income.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of creatives and photographers especially can kind of get lost in is forgetting that it has a business model of its own. If you're going full
Yep.
time, you can be enamored with the creativity aspect and shooting, but like you said, you gotta figure out the numbers and figure out your business model and how you can make it work for you. So we talked a little bit about how you worked with portrait work, and then now you've kind of transitioned more into commercial and editorial. Can you dive in a little into the differences between those, including how the workflow may differ between them?
Yeah, for me, the reason I shifted was, I just had too much going on. And the portrait work requires a lot more steps and a lot more hand holding. I would say the difference is portraits are, business to consumer, and then commercial and editorial are business to business. So
Mm.
that's the main difference. The I love portraiture. I love the impact that portraiture makes on the individual horse owner. The person whose horse is going to be put down next week. That's to be able to capture photos for them before they don't have that horse anymore is like, I mean, it brings a little tear to my eye even now because I went through that last year, losing a horse, and the photos are all I have left of her, and it means so much to me that I have so many photos with her and of her. And really, as horse owners, we never know when that day is coming because of course horses are so fragile. And so it wasn't an easy decision to let go of that, but the commercial work that I do, and in the last year, I've really refined that to being like horse care, veterinary, nutrition brands. And when I help a brand that I believe in market their products, show the value of their products, I can help thousands of horses and horse
Sure.
owners. And so as much as I loved making that impact on the individual, and I still do portraits here and there especially for people that I know personally or I've worked with in the past. But I've actually increased my impact by going to doing the commercial work. And, commercial work can be anything from a full agency shoot where there's a design agency or creative agency involved, advertising agency involved, and the client and a whole video team and my team, and big shoots, to a company sending me products and I shoot them here at my farm or at somebody's farm that I know locally. And or even sometimes it might be for like a local horse trainer or body worker, helping them create images to market their services or business.
Yeah, makes sense. How has that kind of transformed your business model moving from portraiture into more of the commercial?
It's fewer shoots a year, but the stakes are higher.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, it's really portraiture, there's a lot of work on the back end if you're doing it correctly, in my opinion. I think there needs to be a really good sales process in place, and you're creating products and albums and wall art for people. But with commercial, it's a lot more planning on the front end. You're part of a lot of creative calls and working with, different players within the team, and they're bringing you, mood boards and all of this. And then there's a bidding process too. Like usually when I was doing portraits, it was like, here's the price, and okay, that's the price. But now I'm bidding huge jobs where I have to have special software for that, and sometimes work with mentors to help me make sure I'm covering all my bases. And so I would say, generally speaking, the stakes are a lot higher. I don't remember what the question was anymore.
just how it's kind of adapted, your
Yeah,
business model has adapted with that change, but
yeah.
yeah.
So that's it. Fewer shoots, but much bigger shoots with bigger outcomes. Yeah.
Right, right. Makes sense.
Mhm.
Transitioning a bit into kind of the education aspect of your career and helping out other photographers, what do you consider maybe the best ways for a photographer to grow, maybe not only just their skills, but their confidence as well?
Practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
It's it's a thing that happens with photographers when they get to a certain point of like competence and a certain point of their business where people are hiring them, that they forget to go and do shoots for their own growth and their own enjoyment. And I'm still constantly doing that. Like I get a new piece of gear, I call up a friend, hey, can I come over and take some pictures of your horses? Would you model for me? Or if I want to try a different kind of lighting, or I want to create some stock images, I'm going out and I'm shooting for me, where I'm doing it for me, and my model gets something out of it, but they're not dictating the shoot. If it's a portrait session where I'm being paid, I'm talking to them about, you know, how do you want these images to feel? What kind of, what do you want, more close-ups or more lifestyle? And I'm really working with them to create images that fill their vision, which is great.
Yeah.
And but then when I want to do something to scratch a creative itch for me, I do it on my own, and sometimes it's just walking out the back door and do something with my own horses. That's one of
Sure.
the beauties of having my own farm with my horses on the property.
Mhm.
Um, but also, the obviously like the education, like having a mentor or attending a workshop, that's always going to be a way to take your skills to the next level, because you don't know what you don't know. And I try to do at least one kind of mentor thing or online course or something every year. And I'm also on YouTube constantly, like, maybe not in the photography realm, but maybe in like the course creation realm or, in the business realm. Like, I'm just always trying to learn and have like that constant curiosity in my brain of like, how can I make this better? How can I learn more? How can I, I'm never satisfied. And I think
Yeah.
that curiosity and that lack of satisfaction is something that photographers really need in order to keep pushing forward because things are constantly changing. The technology is changing, the trends are changing, the tools are changing. It's just really, you have to continue to grow in order to keep up.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't want to get stagnant. You can always have room for improvement. And like you said, there's constantly changes to your editing software, to the gear that you're using, anything like that. So there's in this day and age with technology advancing, there's always going to be new things to learn. And just like with anything, with, training horses, there's
Yeah.
always going to be growth you can make, and there's nothing wrong with going back to the basics either. So,
Yeah. Yeah, like
yeah.
my trainer, she's training my young horse in dressage. Well, she goes to like almost all the big name dressage clinics around here. She's super accomplished, but she also knows that she can take a nugget away from just about anybody, and I think it takes some humility though, too, as a creative, I mean, as a horse trainer, as a photographer, or whatever, to say, I don't know everything and I could learn something from this person.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of expanding on growth, what are some common mistakes that you see in equine photography, or maybe even some mistakes of your own that you have learned from?
I'd say, it kind of goes with what I mentioned before of just like the pricing, people undervaluing what they do, and also not differentiating. Because if you follow let's say there's a trend and every photographer's doing it, and if you're doing it too, and if your website looks the same, uses the same words, capture the bond, that's a word that everybody uses or phrase, um, and everything's just the same, then you have no choice but to compete on price.
Yeah.
But if you find a way to be very specific about who you are and the work you do and your approach and the level of service that you offer, then you're not stuck at that low price. And so I think that's the biggest thing. And there's this I forget there's a name for it, but it's like the it's like a herd mentality of like it's
Yeah.
safer to be part of a herd. If I do go do something that's different, then what if it fails, or what if people laugh at me and they judge me or whatever? And so
Yeah.
everybody just stays where it's safe, but it's really hard to make money where it's safe.
Yeah, that's true. That's really great advice because it is easy to just maybe you're even just inspired by somebody else's work and business model and you kind of want to use that as inspiration, but ultimately you've got to be yourself and bring your own individuality to it, to set yourself apart.
Hmm.
Um, and then I know this is always a common question, but as we know, it's the photographer who makes the photographer, not their gear. But
Yeah.
that said, what do you kind of recommend for a photographer to keep in mind when selecting their gear? So maybe not the actual specific
Yeah.
body and lens, but just things to take into consideration.
Well, at this point, I wouldn't recommend anyone buy a DSLR. Um, Mirrorless is not just the future, it's the present.
Yeah.
And, brands like Canon are discontinuing support for older gear, for DSLRs, for EF lenses. And I know other brands are doing the same. And so, not only that, but the mirrorless technology has taken just the art of photography to a new level. Like, before I was constantly worried about things being in focus, and I just don't have that worry anymore.
Definitely.
Especially, I just upgraded to the R5 Mark II, and it just can't seem to take an out of focus picture. And I just can't even fathom that coming from where I started with the very most basic, half my images were out of focus kind of technology. It's just mind blowing what people can start with now. Like
Yeah.
it's but also like if you're photographing horses, make sure you have a lens that's at least 85 millimeters or longer, preferable, the gold standard lens in any brand is the 70 to 200 lens, preferably a 2.8 if you're going to be in low light at all. But I pretty much shoot horses almost exclusively with that lens. I also will keep a wide angle lens on me when I'm doing more commercial or editorial work, because I can break the rules a little bit more and create a little more interest and variety. But if I'm just out, like I was out a couple weeks ago photographing a mare in foal, I did not even bring the wide angle lens out. I just took my one camera with the 70 to 200 and was able to create a ton of, variety just with that zoom range.
Yeah, absolutely. And then my last question for you before we transition into the audience Q&A, is just if you have any other advice that maybe we didn't touch on for fellow equine photographers or aspiring photographers.
I would really just say to a journey that I've personally been on in the last couple of years is really studying the horse themselves and being able to identify when a horse is stressed by a photo shoot and when too much is too much and trying to get their ears forward and all of that. And horse people like to think they know everything about horses, and myself included. Although, no, I know I don't know everything about horses, but safety is so important at equine portraits or photo sessions of any kind, because we're doing a lot of things that really push the horse a little bit beyond their comfort zone. And last year, one of my students was doing a photo shoot and a horse just whipped around and kicked her elbow and shattered it into so many pieces. She'll never have full use of that elbow ever again. Well, maybe she will. Let's be optimistic, but it's not likely. And photography is her entire job. She also does pet photography. And so I just think people need to be really smart and really focused on the horse and the horse's behavior in order to keep everybody safe, to keep the photographer safe, to keep the handler safe, to keep the horse safe, and to not sacrifice the horse in pursuit of great photos.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because sometimes we lose the vision of the fact that they are a large and unpredictable animal sometimes.
Yes.
So,
with feelings and flight tendencies, and
yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we will move into these audience questions. Grace wants to know, what is your advice for the marketing aspect of being a full-time photographer?
Oh, that's a great idea, or great question. I'm very passionate about this because what I see is most photographers are depending on social media. And as you know, as a social media professional, that on average, about 4 to 5% of our followers see our posts, unless the post is popular.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if you have an email list, you're probably going to have a reach of more like 40%. And so my very first advice for photographers wanting to market is to find a way to build an email list and then actually email the people on the list. And to remember that they signed up for it and it's okay to send out emails. I send out a weekly email. It's a duplicate of my social media post, but I usually get more engagement and more views in email than I do online, but I put it in both places. And then I send out a quarterly email. This is more on my education side of my business, but a quarterly email that's much longer with like a more in-depth article. And that is so much more reach for me than what I put on social media. And then you can cross-purpose as well. Like, hey, here's some recent posts, that kind of a thing. The other thing I say to photographers is you've got to get out and be meeting people in person. Go see if a local tack shop would let you hang your work, get to know the tack shop owner. Could you do a promotion together of, buy a new outfit for your photo shoot and get, 10% off or something like that. And going to maybe not horse shows. You don't want to go take photos at horse shows where you're not the official photographer, but maybe there's a clinic in your area. And I love marketing myself at clinics because people just have more time. At a show, you're kind of stressed and you're trying to get your horse ready in time for your class or your ride time or whatever. And people are in and out, but a clinic's a little more laid back. And you could even do like a swag bag where you put a granola bar and some horse treats and a little postcard in it. But anything that gets you out in public, meeting people in person, because of course, marketing is about getting people to know, like, and trust you. And the best way to do the like and trust, and well, the know part too, is to meet people face to face. And so I think those are my two biggest marketing tips is don't rely on social media, build an
Mhm.
email list. I guess it's three, and get out and network with horse people in person as much as possible.
Yeah, great advice. Christoph's question is, what is your opinion on AI's impact on photography and which niche could survive under this wave of AI generated pictures?
Oh, great question. I'm very passionate about this topic too. Um, when AI first like came on the scene, back in I think it was like September of 2022 or 23, I played a little bit in Midjourney and I'm like, yeah, this is not a problem. Like 9 months later, I was like, this could be a problem, especially for the commercial side of things. And I another big part of my business, which is how I work with Horse Illustrated, is I have a stock photo library. And I thought, oh, I'm just going to stop caring about adding to my stock photo library because people are just going to generate images. Because I thought the next version of AI was going to be better, like the next Midjourney. Every time they update it, it's going to get better and better. Well, the problem is things like Midjourney and a lot of AI have plateaued a bit
Mhm.
because they're not scraping a lot more new information. And with horses, if you've ever, looked at AI images of horses, they can't get the tack right. Like
Mhm.
they've got a girl in a cowboy hat and an English saddle with a bit that does not exist in the real world, and the horse has 5 legs. And that's still happening. Like this
Yeah.
isn't 3 generations ago. The 5 legs thing is getting better, but it's still out there. And so I'm not as worried yet. Plus, I don't know about you, but personally, when I see a brand using AI images, and of course, like I'm super sensitive to it, so I know when they are AI, to me, I'm like, I don't want anything to do with that brand. And I polled my followers earlier this year and I said, um, does it lower your trust in a brand if they're using AI images? And all but one person said it did. They're like, well, if they can't afford to buy photos, what else are they skimping on in their product? And the example product I had was like an X-ray machine for horses. Like these people should probably be able to afford a real photographer or at least stock photos.
Yeah.
And then on the portrait side, I just can't imagine not wanting or somebody gen I can't imagine generating a photo of me with my horses versus having somebody actually capture the bond that I have with them.
It's true though.
Um, yeah, but it is true. Like AI can't create that feeling. I
Right.
when I look at AI images, they feel soulless. Now, of course, I'm a photographer, so I'm like much more invested in this. But I think portraiture is really safe. I think commercial is a little on the edge, and I'm using AI in my business fairly significantly. I'm using a service called Imagine AI to help with editing. It's cut my editing time at least in half. I'm using AI retouching tools in Photoshop. I'm using ChatGPT for idea generation, um, to help me write difficult emails. And so I'm not anti-AI. I'm anti-AI taking things that are real and making them unreal, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like a little bit of a hypocrite in that I'll use it in some areas of my business, and then I don't want it to touch other areas of my business.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of Adobe Stock, I will say there's a wonderful search filter where you can exclude generative AI, which
Yes.
I use every time that I use Adobe Stock. So,
Yeah.
um, Jenny's question is if you have a funny story or blooper from a photo shoot with a horse or any other animal.
Ooh. Funny story. Wow, my brain is just going completely blank. I'm sorry. I
No, that's okay.
can't.
Maybe the
It's this
funniest thing
very
you've
serious business.
ever had
What?
someone do to get ears up.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, running around, throwing rocks. Yeah. I mean, getting ears up, that is comedy a lot of the time because especially with horses that are just really, really chill. Um, one of the most fun photo shoots that I've done recently, I did a photo shoot for Absorbing. They have a new line of treats coming out. I won't say anything more than that. And the model that I chose for that shoot would do the like flamin' face constantly. And I was able to create the most hilarious photos of this horse treat right in front of the teeth while he's going like this. And they bought those images, and I
Yeah.
cannot wait to see those in their advertising.
The horse
And
knew the assignment for sure.
I 100%. I was like, there could have been no horse better for this job than. And then when he wasn't doing that, he's this like stunning bay warm blood with just the sweetest expression, and he and his owner really get along well. But yeah, they were like, and then Absorbing was just thrilled that this
Yeah,
horse was so expressive about eating the treats.
that's great. What a great model.
Yeah, I love good
Um,
models.
yes. Jenny also asks, what is your favorite place equine photography has taken you, whether that's a specific location or an event?
Iceland.
Oh,
Spain is a super close second, but in 2022, I believe, I went to Iceland for about 8, 9 days. And it was just like being inside a screensaver plus horses.
yeah.
And and just the landscapes were amazing. The place we stayed was amazing. The food was amazing. Like it just the whole thing. And it was so healing after COVID and
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. It was incredible. And then last month I went to Spain co-leading a workshop with Nicole from uh, Hair of the Dog Academy. And she more organized it than I did, but I was her co-pilot. And we just got to photograph the most incredible things, but then we also had like a tourism aspect of it, of like food tours and bike tours and spa day. And I mean, it just felt like a very unreal experience. And then the horses we got to photograph were incredible. And I haven't been able to share any images yet, but I got to photograph the Spanish riding school performance.
Cool.
Yeah, with like horses, leaping in the air, and that was amazing. But I'm waiting on they have to approve the images before I share them publicly.
Gotcha. Well, I'm
Yeah.
excited to see those, and I loved the Iceland ones. And for those of you who don't know, that photo spread in the magazine ended up winning an AHP award because it was just such a beautiful layout, and obviously the photos are just so stunning. Like you said, it looked like a dream, like something
It
out of a
was.
fairy tale. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
can't wait to go back.
yeah, I don't blame
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And Spain, the reason I was able to photograph that show in Spain was because next year I will have a spread in Horse Illustrated featuring my trip to Spain. And so I used that excuse to get credentials to photograph that show, which was such a treat.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Madison, her question is, what are your recommendations for photographers looking for feedback and to find education opportunities behind the camera and in photo editing?
Well, there's a lot of great education out there. Obviously, I offer a mentorship in January to March that's considered an online cohort. So it's more than just like you watch a course and then you're done. There's weekly coaching calls, weekly lessons, and homework that I give people feedback on. And even though it takes place in the winter, people learn. Even though it's like not always ideal conditions, they do learn a lot. I get great feedback from that mentorship. And then I offer an in-person retreat every summer called the Pegasus Retreat. And that's like 5 days of hands-on plus one-on-one feedback sessions. And that one's coming up in June. It's full for this year, but there's a waiting list for future years. But in addition to that, like Phyllis Burchett and Cowgirls with Cameras has a great workshop series. And then there's people with online courses like Kirsty Marie Photography. Um, I'm thinking of this podcast I've been listening to about this horrific experience people had at a retreat. And so definitely vet the retreats that you're going on. But the ones I just mentioned, they've been around forever and I've only heard good things about them. And so, yeah, definitely do your research. Maybe put in the photographer's name or the retreat name and reviews, because not all retreats or workshops are created equal.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Madison also asked, are there any other types of photography outside of portraits and commercial that you enjoy or would recommend for a newer photographer to try?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's there's I mean, outside of equine, or did she
If
say?
you want to answer it that
Yeah.
way, or yeah,
Well, there's horse sports,
yeah,
there's Western sports, there's English sports, obviously, like that's a horse shows and competitions are a great way to get your feet wet and to get your name out there. Again, even though social media is out there, what I said earlier about how people hire their horse show photographer for portraits, that's still true.
yeah.
But also, I mean, anything you want to photograph. Okay, so here would be my advice. If you're just starting out, do a 365 project. I did 2 of them in my career where I took a photo a day for 365 days. And I could use my cell phone once in a while, but I really wanted it to be my regular camera that I'm using for my work. And my goal was to when I first would start the project, I would take, or even I would approach a subject, I would take the picture I would normally take, and then I would say, how can I make this better? And I would try different angles and different lenses until I made something that I hadn't made before. And that repetition and that practice and that discipline improved my photography, especially the one I did in 2011. Like, I wasn't the same photographer at the end of the year as when I started. And I photographed everything, my dogs, flowers, weather. And the one thing I'm really excited about right now in my photography that has nothing to do with horses is there's a storm chaser in my area by the name of Melanie Metz, and she had a TV show called Twister Sisters. And so we've been talking, she takes people on storm chasing trips, and because we're both in the same area, we're going to do one around here the next time there's like tornadoes in my area. And I'm so excited to go on a storm chasing tour. I can't remember the last time I was this excited to photograph something that had nothing to do with horses.
Yeah. I think that's a really great thing about photography, though, is you can take pictures of literally anything. So
Yeah,
even like you were talking about earlier with practicing and just practicing, practice, practice, even that, A, it helps hone your skills, obviously, but B, it's a great creative outlet. So
it is.
yeah.
And those years that I did the 365 project, like my entire year was documented. I mean, not like everything about it, but like I have more pictures of my cats from those years than I've taken ever since, or more pictures of my dogs who are now getting older, like it's also just a really neat way to document your life. And if you have a family, if you have children, which I don't have, I just have the fur babies, it's a way to document a year in their life too. If you have children, you have like infinitely more subjects than, well, maybe not. I have like 7 animals, so I guess that's kind of a lot of subjects.
Right, right. Jessica's question is, you mentioned not relying on social media, and I find that it can be a bit oversaturated. How do you deal with feeling like the equine photography industry can be oversaturated these days?
Yeah, and it's true. It seems like somebody will go in one of the horse photography groups in this area and say they're looking for a photographer, and there's like 250 comments in 24 hours.
Mhm.
Um, I think not marketing yourself as the cheapest one that doesn't cost an arm and a leg is probably the main thing. There's this book called The Blue Ocean Strategy, and the premise is that it's like sharks in an ocean. And the red ocean is where all the sharks are feeding together. And that's all the cheap photographers that everything looks the same, blah, 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 blah. And what you need to do in order to survive is to swim away from the red ocean and find your blue ocean. For instance, in my area, I can only think of one equine photographer who does in-person sales, with clients. Every other photographer just takes your photos and sends you the files and says, have a nice day. This is actually a service. Like, doing a sales session with people is actually really helpful for them, because how many people get their files and never do anything with it? And I'm not salesy. Like, I'm not a pushy person. I'm an introvert. I'm soft. But I really learned over the years that walking people through that process, and at the end they get an album and art for their wall and some digital files, people were so grateful for that over having a shoot and burn experience where they were like, okay, now what do I do with all of this? And it would be so simple for somebody in my area to just offer a better level of service and market that. They would immediately be in blue ocean space. But it's hard for people to get out of that herd mentality and that thing that feels safe because it's what everybody else is doing. But that's where the saturation is. And I mean, I agree, there's a lot of saturation, but also I was just talking to my trainer about this the last few days, of how many people get in business and get out of business in like a 2 or 3 year span. And so there's just constant churn too in all these things, because I think people get into it and they think, oh, I'm going to make money doing this. And then they realize how expensive it is and they're not charging enough. And so it's not just about like improving your level of service and finding that blue ocean and something that you're going to offer that's unique. It's about also surviving if you want to make this business, because it's not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Bello is asking, how did you get your foot in the door with commercial photography after focusing on portraits?
Well, I'll be honest, the commercial photography kind of found me. It's very helpful that I'm in an area that has a lot of major nutrition brands for equine. So I've got Nutrina, Triple Crown, Purina. There's a lot of brands that are right here in Minneapolis and ad agencies in Minneapolis. I actually did a shoot for Nutrina in 2009, and I wasn't technically ready for commercial photography at that point. And I just said, oh, it's not for me. And this was while I was still doing weddings, but I didn't really enjoy the process.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took until like, I think about 2013, maybe 14, until I was ready to dip my foot back in commercial photography, because it's really a different mindset. It is more collaborative, and in that they're dictating a lot more of what you're doing, which I'm totally fine with, and it requires advanced skills. You can't really, I mean, you can do it without knowing how to light things, but it's really helpful if you know how to do lighting, off-camera lighting. But I think the steps to get there, you probably need to start with local, brands, local, like somebody that makes a product that lives local to you, or somebody that does a service that's local. So some more like a small brands, branding sessions for professionals, learn the craft and how to price these things and how to be really professional. One of the hallmarks of my business is I want to be really easy to work with. Yeah. And from inquiry to getting paid, I want that whole process to be as smooth as possible for my clients. And that takes some learning. It takes some education on how to, just create an invoice. And I mean, there's just so much to it that's really different. Like, most of my commercial clients just do bank transfers to pay me. They're not paying me with a credit card. They're not paying me online, or sometimes they are, but it's much more of a, commercial mentality, not just in the photography, but also in how you take care of people. So if you're a shoot and burn photographer and you haven't done a lot of customer service or sales, I would say do that first, and then start to work with smaller brands and work your way up. But you really have to not just have the craft part down, you have to have the business side of it down, and the service side of it down, and the stress side of it. I mean, I was at a huge shoot last fall, and where there was a videographer just not making my job very easy.
Right.
And he snapped at me at one point, and I was like, okay, great.
Yeah.
You just have to be professional. And, before I was a photographer, I worked in corporate America. Like I sat in a cubicle. I dealt with difficult people.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of photographers now, they skip that. They go right from like,
Right.
you know, college or high school, and they never have to learn how to deal with conflict and challenging people and continuing to smile and not let it get to you in the middle of a 10-hour shoot where the stakes are really high. So not to scare people, but just also not to say don't go too big too fast, or you might find yourself in over your head.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like there's just so many more elements to it than doing your own portrait session with a client. So,
Yeah, because really, when you're doing a portrait session, you're in charge and you can be like,
yes.
okay, stand here and go here and do this. And a commercial shoot, they're like, I've literally done shoots where I handed the art director an iPad and they were seeing what I was shooting as I was shooting it and then making
Oh,
suggestions. The cool part of that is I learned so much about what the art directors are looking for advertising photos. So I didn't mind it at all.
yeah,
I mean, I was the one that offered that, but for a lot of portrait photographers, that would be terrifying for a
sure.
client to see unedited images that they were shooting.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be able to take that constructive criticism in lifetime, especially.
Yes,
So,
yes.
great. Like,
Yeah. So it's a lot of experience. If you really want to do commercial photography, find a commercial photographer to assist in or out of the equine industry. Probably easier to find somebody outside the equine industry that is doing commercial photography. I mean, that's kind of what I did. It was more of a film set, some film sets that I was on, but that helped me understand like what's this person's role? What's this person's role? Like, even just those kinds of things on the bigger commercial shoots, like just understanding like what's an art director and what,
yeah,
and there's video and there's a director and an assistant director and there's an audio or, there's so many different roles that, like I said, if you dive in too fast, too big, it could be pretty overwhelming.
for sure. For sure. Well, I think that wraps everything up. So, everybody,
Good.
thank you so much for your time. And Shelley, of course, thank you for all of your time and your insight. I really enjoyed it. And I think our audience will have as well, and definitely gained a lot of insight today. So, thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was really fun and got to talk about some things I haven't really talked about in the past. So that was great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.